Let's say you're hiring software engineers. You should ask a lot of questions in an interview. But in addition to those, you should check for coding skills because some engineers talk impressively but can't code. So actually give them a take home assignment and check their code. When you give them a take home assignment, put the question in writing in a document. Don't keep it in your mind because you will make small mistakes when communicating it. And when you look at the code and you conclude, oh, the candidate didn't do this well, that might be your mistake in phrasing the question. So you don't want to go there. And also, if you put it in writing and people ask clarifying questions and you realize, oh, I should have clarified that, you can go back and edit it. This process of improvement needs to happen, and it will happen if you put it in a document. It won't happen if you try to remember it. Choose a take home exercise that takes around 2 hours. That's enough to check the basics, and you can always ask follow up questions based on the code regarding more advanced things. If you give them an exercise that takes half a day or more, competent engineers who have a lot of other companies they could be working with won't do it. Only the second tier engineers will do it. And you don't want an interview process that ends up rejecting the best engineers and hires the second tier ones. Don't do live coding, it's stressful for the candidate. It takes up a lot of time, time is limited in an interview. And if there are flaws in the code, you don't know whether it is because of the lack of time or because that's the kind of code the candidate writes usually. And anyway, there's no requirement to write code immediately in the job. In some professions, you need to react immediately. If you're a tennis player and the ball comes at you, you can't think for 20 seconds and then react. If you're a soldier and someone is firing at you, you can't sit there and say, okay, what should I do? You should react instantaneously. Software engineering is not like that. Typically, we can take time. So let them take the time by doing it at their convenience. Don't create pressure because it's already stressful. Don't make it worse. One is just at a human level, you don't want to do that to anyone. Secondly, the stress can also affect their performance. And you don't want that. Don't ask him to code on a whiteboard, it makes it harder. Don't give him your laptop and ask him to code. Let him do it on his laptop at his convenience. Basically, the interview environment for an effective interview should be as similar to the real work as possible. Don't tell him a stack to use. Don't say code this in Node, for example. If someone is an excellent Django engineer, let him code it in Django. You should evaluate people at their best. Because if you ask him to code it in Node, and he writes bad Node code because he's never worked with Node or maybe not even JavaScript, you might say, okay, this is a bad engineer and reject him. But you don't want to do that, right? And when you do this, you may end up hiring a mediocre Node engineer. An excellent Django engineer is a better hire than a mediocre Node engineer because in a couple of months he will learn Node anyway and do a better job than a mediocre Node engineer if his fundamentals are good. So let people use whatever stack they want, whatever programming language they want. When I suggest a take-home exercise, sometimes people ask me, what if he's asking his friend to code it for him? To address that concern, ask a specific question like, what happens on line 46? Why did you do it this way? Usually people don't cheat. And if they do, if there is a big difference between the code and his ability to answer questions regarding the code, like if the code itself is kind of not very clear and he is also not kind of clear, he probably did write the code. If the code is good and his answers are good, then again he probably wrote the code. It's rare that the code is good but his answers are bad. In those cases, reject him. It doesn't matter whether he actually plagiarized it. If someone can't answer questions about the code, that itself is a reason to reject him. So that is how you detect and handle plagiarism. The other question is, when should you give the take home assignment? There are two ways you can do it. One is you can do it before the first interview. 90% of candidates will never get back to you, which reduces your interview load, because otherwise interviewing can become a project by itself, hiring, and it can slow down your actual work. And the most important qualification for a candidate is that he wants the job. So in a way you could say it's good if people who are not serious don't do it. The other way of doing it is you conduct one interview, then give the take home assignment. Then a lot of people will be willing to do it, especially the good engineers who have other options. They want to see that the company has invested some time in them before they invest time in the company, which is a completely fair expectation from their side. And you don't, like I said earlier, want a process that rejects good engineers. So this is how you check for coding skills in an interview. And when they send you the code, have a follow-up interview. Before that, go through the code. Note down a bunch of questions in different areas like naming, formatting, comments, clarity, edge cases, error handling, performance, whatever categories you want. And schedule an interview after that, and then ask those questions. That is how you check for coding skills in an interview. If you'd like me to help your team in hiring, there's a link in the description for my consulting website.